In California, all assets acquired during the marriage are community property and subject to an equal division. And that includes assets that are tangible as well as intangible. Some pension plans may be considered intangible to a certain extent because you may not be exactly sure what it's going to be worth maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road. That applies usually to what are called defined benefit pension plans. That a defined benefit plan is the old standard, work this long and hit this particular age, and you've made this is your highest wages during that period or in the 3 years preceding retirement, and then they have a formula for calculating what your monthly benefit is going to be. A defined contribution plan is the more modern, if you will, plans such as a 401k, where you contribute money. You're not investing time, you're investing actual money, and then your employer may contribute a similar sum for your benefit. So you have two different ways to figure out what is the community interest, because you can have hybrid plans. For example, on a defined benefit plan, maybe one of the spouses worked towards that retirement for 5 years before the marriage, or for 5 years after the separation. So a portion of it might be community and a portion of it would be separate property. On a defined contribution, the party at the time of marriage perhaps had $50,000 in that 401k and then contributed to it during the marriage and then contributed to it after the separation. So there's two different methodologies for figuring out what is the community property component of that retirement plan. With a defined benefit plan, we generally use what's called the Brown timeline, and for a case called in remarriage of Brown. And that's pretty simple. What it involves in is first calculating how many years was put into earning that pension. Let's say it was 20 years. And of that 20 years, how many years was the retiree married and living with his or her spouse? Let's say that's 10 years. Well, obviously 10 is half of 20. So 50% of that retirement is community property, meaning the alternate payee, the non-participating spouse, will receive 25% of that pension as her community property share. The participating spouse, the actual retiree, will receive 25% as his community interest in that pension and receive the other 50% as his separate property interest. So it would be a 75% to him, 25% to her. Now that was easy because 10 is obviously half of 20, but you can see that if it was a 5-year marriage, the community interest would be reduced to 25%. They'd each have a 12.5% interest. So that's the Brown timeline. With a 401k type defined contribution plan, what you're going to look at is if you've got $50,000 at date of marriage and you've got $500,000 at date of separation, you're going to take that $50,000 and figure out what its appreciation would be to the present day, and then essentially subtract that from the $500,000, also subtract whatever post-separation contributions were made and any appreciation on those, and it could have depreciated, it could have been losses, but let's assume that the market went up. You would subtract that post-separation contribution from that $500,000. What remains after those two deductions is community, and that would be divided equally, and that would be the outspouse's interest in that defined contribution 401k.